All right, here's my
You
big
wanna-
question before we get started.
Okay.
How is it that there's a show with the two of us, the
Uh-huh.
two of the most kitschiest people I know on the planet,
See, I'm looking at
okay?
all my shit. I'm like, yeah,
And we don't
uh-huh.
have a theme song yet.
I was just gonna start singing it when you were gonna say go. I was going with the Tito and Bill good time.
Uh, they're gonna have a good time for
We're
an
gonna have a
hour,
good time. Well,
but
I
only
have,
for an hour. Well, we'll have to put something together. You know,
yes.
apart from being voracious music listeners, we're also voracious readers, both of us.
Shh, you're in the library. Use your library voice.
Okay, okay. And we chose our 5 favorite books about music or musicians.
Yes.
Okay. All right, we're done with that. We're outside.
Okay.
And I say you should go first because you're the youngest, and then I'll go second because I'm the prettiest. Okay.
Oh my gosh. First of all, I'm gonna start with gonna preface my list with one of the first music books I've ever written. It was at the elementary school library. I went to Liggett Street School in Panorama City, California. This must have been a first or second grade. There was a kid's book about Stevie Wonder, and
Okay.
I thought it was the neatest thing ever because, I enjoyed reading and I enjoyed your Charlotte's Webs and your Charlie and the Chocolate Factories and all that stuff. But I thought it was so hip that we had a little picture book about Stevie Wonder and, from fingertips up until maybe Ebony and Ivory, just very, like a Fisher Price book.
hmm
And I just thought that was the hippest thing. And I thought, wow, people actually write about cool stuff. I want to read more books like this, not what I have to read, but what I want to read. So, and I'm not much of a reader, but I love music books like what we're going to talk about today. So in no particular order, what I'm going to start off with, the book that I written down first is Lexicon Devil: The Fast Times and Short Life of Darby Crash and the Germs. And it's a series of interviews with people who knew him, who were involved in that scene, all the former Germs. And it was compiled by Brendan Mullen and Don Bowles, who actually was the drummer of the Germs. So, of course, Darby Crash and the Germs were just legendary. Um, when I first heard of the Germs, when I first saw the Germs, was in the Decline of Western Civilization movie,
hmm
probably around junior high school. And I thought, this band is awful. What's the big deal? This is crap. So then, and then I found their tape used at Moby Disc, and I bought it for like $1. And then it was like, oh, I get it now. There's more to this than just a drunken buffoon, even though he was, a mess, as we all know. And if you read this book, it's, wow, a very charismatic figure. I probably would want to have kicked his ass if I was running that scene, but, I get it. He was, he had the charisma, and he could have done so much more, but, and it's a really cool, paints a very cool picture of what Los Angeles was like from 77 to up until he died in 1980.
hmm
And what I got most out of that is, very charismatic, manipulative, gay, and a huge David Bowie fan. And he was also fascinated with L. Ron Hubbard, but yeah, still very young, and kids, really just kids, and it's very fascinating. And
Okay.
I highly recommend. And I let someone borrow it, and I haven't. And that was, and I don't know what happened to this dude, so I might have to buy another copy to read it again. And a movie was made out of it called What We Do Is Secret,
Secret.
but it
Yeah.
was I wish it was, it looks like an after school special, and it's kind of laughable, but
Right. There's
maybe I'll
some good
watch it.
moments in it.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
some good moments in it, but you feel that a majority of the actors are play acting. If
yeah,
if
yeah.
you can, then I do think that Shane West really got into his part. I mean, that's
Mhm.
clear, but I think some of the
Yeah,
other people are you don't really get a sense that some of the other actors understood the culture.
yeah.
And that was also the first time that I was exposed to Okie Dog, and I had to
Oh
ask
my
you about that.
gosh.
All right, well, for my first book, it's kind of in the same time period.
Yeah.
My favorite time of music, hands down,
Yes.
period, anything, was 76 to 79. Most of it was
Mm-hmm.
going down in England. And this book was written for me. It's called Punk Diary, 1970 to 79. It's written by George Gearmark, or I should say compiled by George Gearmark, and it chronicles from 70. It starts with the release of Funhouse by the Stooges, but concentrates mostly on 76 through 79 in England. There's some input from the New York scene and some of the LA bands from that time, but it's mostly English based. And it's as close as you can to getting a day by day diary of what was going down in a general sense in the music scene at that time. Some bands I had never heard of before, and that was my introduction to some of them.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting. Like I'll just say, like you have. I'm going to pick a date here. Friday, April 20th, 1979. They start talking about the first release by the Specials. They talk about the Dickies' latest 45, which was the version of the Banana Splits theme,
Oh,
and then
so good.
Penetration. They detail their newest single, which is Danger Signs, and then you
Another good.
have listings of acts of concert bills in England. There's some stuff that in the U.S. and Canada, but it's mostly in England. So on April 20th, 1979, were we in Edinburgh? We could have seen Magazine with Simple Minds opening.
Oh my gosh, where is that flux capacitor?
Yeah. Oh, if you ever want one, that's for this. Uh, George later put together a sequel, Post-Punk Diary, 1980 to 1982, and then combined the two into Punk Diary, The Ultimate Train Spotter's Guide to Underground Rock, 1970 to 1982. There's a couple tweaks in there, but not too much. And it's a book I've returned to again and again for over 20 years. And
Wow.
that's my first pick.
I am going to check that out. That just sounds intriguing. I almost want to just hang up and just go find it right now.
Well, yeah, I think the easiest one will actually be the full compendium.
Hmm.
I think that's the one that's the easiest to find at this
Yeah.
point. And that's a sad thing about some of these books are like you got to get them on the first printing because they ain't gonna be a second.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, it just,
You can either find them for really cheap at Amazon, or you just can't find them at all. Or if you
oh,
do find them, like
I have a
double.
book on the
double
Stranglers that I almost fainted when I saw what the Amazon price was.
Oh my
A
gosh,
book
how
called
much?
No Mercy, 370 used.
No, no, no.
No, Kindle, $10. Yeah, but
My second pick is Bootleg: The Secret History of the Other Recording Industry. Now, people who know me or who knew me, especially in the 90s, I loved bootlegs. I was fascinated by bootlegs. My mother had a Beatle bootleg called Renaissance something. I forget what it was. And then it was just, I'm like, what is this to do with this record? It's got like a Xerox copy of it, but it doesn't look like the other Beatle records that you have. And my dad goes, that's a bootleg. And it kind of explained that to me. And I thought it was fascinating that my parents are kind of breaking the law over here. But I used to work at a record store that specialized in bootlegs, among other things. So I was very fascinated. So this book kind of tells from the very history of bootlegs and how a lot of these Beatle things got started,
Mhm.
and even with the artwork, especially with some of the labels, like the trademark of quality and the original Cornyphone record label. They always put out the best bootleg product, and a lot of their artwork that they used for these albums was just wonderful. These really
Oh
cool
yeah.
illustrations.
I mean,
Yeah, like
you go to Who bootlegs. The art on some
oh
of the
my
Who bootlegs is amazing.
yeah, I'm looking at one right now. We got Tales from the Who, and it kind of looks like a Tales from the Crypt comic book
Hmm.
cover, and then just beautiful, and a lot of and actually just kind of slightly off topic. Last summer at the um, Forest Lawn Cemetery here in Los Angeles. It's a huge cemetery, and there's even art galleries in there because they had an art exhibit about album cover art, and they featured a lot of these. I can't think of the guy's name right now. I think his name was William Stout. I think that was his name. Is who did a lot of these illustrations, a lot of these great Rolling Stone ones, and
Hmm.
so it's a very fascinating read. I mean, I wish I can tell you more about it right now because it's been a while since I've read it, but
Hmm.
just a lot of the process that went into a lot of these are radio programs, but a lot of the process of how they got these unreleased recordings from the Beatles and the Beach
Hmm.
Boys, and how they pretty much conned these people who worked at the recording at the record um, labels, and the way they kind of uh, copied these. They just played
Hmm.
them, and they're playing them in their stereo while it was hooked up to another recorder in another room. Well, it was being just, I don't know. It's awesome. And I think I'm going to revisit this one again because, bootlegs, I still think they make any record collection that much more interesting. And there's a really cool quote by Lenny Kaye written in the back here where it says, bootlegs, it says here, I think that bootlegs keep the flame of the music alive by keeping it out of not only in the industry's conception of the artist, but also the artist's conception of the artist. And I think that is why I think that's a fascinating subject still.
Yeah, I have to say that book, that opened my eyes to something that I never thought of before, which was pre-rock bootlegs. When they start talking about the, movie soundtracks that were never released as soundtracks and opera recordings of radio that, were kind of disguised as transcription discs. But that I thought was, and then, out and out piracy too. There's never thought, because, going into a book like that, thinking, rock history, you think it starts with Dylan and the Beatles in '69, when people had access to, to record pressings and record pressing plants. And I thought that was the most interesting part of it. And then it was also interesting that it didn't, it went into some acts that, their most famous, probably their best document is a bootleg, like Television. I thought that was really interesting, some of the commentary.
And even Springsteen, the Winterland concert, that's what everybody talks about.
Yep.
And it's great because actually, it does talk about the pre-rock stuff in the first couple chapters, and Judy Garland and the Gum Sisters, all this stuff that I would just love to get a hold of. And a funny tidbit about this book: I bought this at a record store in Downey called Middle Earth Records, and I bought this, and then they sold bootlegs, but they also got rated for selling bootlegs. So.
Okay, well, my next choice ties into something I mentioned last week. I had talked about a book by Nicholas Schaffner that came out in the early 80s called The British Invasion. And I think I'm not alone in this. When Lennon was shot, I'm trying to pinpoint what my age would have been. So that would have been 79, 80. I would have been 13 years old. And, boy, is that a time you discover music. And, the Beatles were always around for me. My parents had their records, at least in the New York market. Yellow Submarine and Help were on TV a lot, so the Beatles were always around, and certainly on the radio. But it wasn't until, and I have to say, for a little kid, I had a fair amount of Wings records. But it was after Lennon was shot where I, wanted to know more about the Beatles. And I went to another book by Nicholas Schaffner, who was a very early AIDS death, if you want some trivia there. And he had a book called The Beatles Forever. Now, it's not the densest Beatles book. And, I think with the Beatles, that's, you literally can fill whole libraries with books that have been written about the band. It was a very quick read, picture dominated, yet it gave me a very comprehensive sense of their history in a very short period of time. So I think this would have come out in '79 or so. I'm looking at the copyright here, and 78. And I basically went into that book knowing a little bit about their history and came out thinking I'm an expert. And it's wonderful seeing they have just the pictures that they choose are occasionally bootlegs, but picture sleeves from all around the world. And it's not done in a sort of collector's sense. It's sprinkled as it hits the story, like John Lennon when he had that album of the classic rock songs from Morris Levy that came out, stuff like that. And just things I'd never seen before, like the Corgi Yellow Submarine toys and a lot of the '64 merchandise that came out when they first hit America. And
those paper dresses and all.
And I really think it actually holds up. And I think if people wanted to get a down and dirty, Reader's Digest version that isn't dumbed down about about getting a sense of the Beatles' history, this would be the one I would still send people over to, The Beatles Forever by Nicholas Schaffner.
Perfect.
Okay, so what do you have next up?
Next, I'm looking at it. It is the real Frank Zappa book. It is Frank Zappa's autobiography. It came out in 1990. I am a huge Frank Zappa fan. He's one person who just never ever stopped working, and there's still I'm a huge Zappa fan, from especially the Mothers to his there's still so much stuff to discover about him,
Hmm.
but I'm also a fan of his wit and his comedy, and it's all in this book, and I just love his wit, his wisdom. There's a couple issues that I have with this book, not necessarily with any facts or anything like that. As big as a Frank Zappa fan, he did kind of piss me off in this book when he discusses AIDS and said that it wasn't an epidemic, and it's silly to call it an epidemic because it only affects one group of the population, just the gay people. So that really upsets me, and I wish he was still alive so I can talk to him about it. Maybe he
Hmm.
could sort of explain more about that. But it talks about his early growing up in Lancaster, the way he discovered music, and just such an outsider. And he just kind of when I hear him talk in interviews, it's like he thinks sideways,
Hmm.
But I love it, and a lot of his legal troubles with I don't know, it's just wonderful, and I wish he was still around because I just always wonder what he would be doing right now, whether he was playing. But it's just great being into his in. It's like having a front seat in his mind,
Hmm.
and it talks about his family, but it's almost like he was working so much and constantly that I don't even think he had any time for his family. And
Right.
he kind of touches on that. He just pretty much said, you know what? Gail, his wife slash manager, you deal with the finances in the house, and I will make money for this family. Blah 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 blah. But it's fascinating, and it's been a while since I've read this, so I do want to revisit this again. So
Okay.
Zappa, the real Frank Zappa book.
Okay. Now, being the comic book fan that I am, I have to ask
Yes.
you this, and I don't know if it's covered in the book. Have
Mm-hmm.
you ever heard the recordings that Zappa wrote and produced for Burt Ward, Robin from the '66 series of
No, I
Batman?
have not.
Okay. What you're going to do at some point in the next few
Mm-hmm.
days is you're going to go onto YouTube or some other resources and
Uh-huh.
search for Burt Ward's single Boy Wonder I Love You, backed with
Mm-hmm.
Teenage Bill of Rights. These were written and arranged and produced by Zappa.
Mm-hmm.
Because there
See,
was,
again, so much stuff that I've yet to discover for the
yeah,
huge Zappa fan I am.
and they'll just, you'll be like, it sounds like a record that would have been produced by Frank Zappa for Burt Ward at a time of hyper exploitation of a franchise. So
I still need to listen to the record that he produced for Grand Funk Railroad.
when was that?
Oh gosh, I want to say like 73, 74.
Okay,
What's the name of that record? But yeah, he did produce an album for them.
okay. Well, I did not know that. I mean, I knew about Rundgren, and
Mm-hmm.
and I naturally knew about Terry, whatever the guy that was discovered them, who used to be something in the pack. Can't think of the guy's name. Does it go into his because I know nothing pre um Freak Out. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, and I know
Oh
he
yeah,
had like I know there's like a whole catalog there of doo-wop records
it
and stuff
it
like
does
that.
get he does speak extensively about his doo-wop recording, his recording studio in Lancaster, and like a little film that he tried to make that he was arrested because he had this woman doing simulated sex sounds that he got in trouble for. But
Hmm.
it does get into detail with that.
Okay.
And also because of that, that's what kind of sparked my interest in doo-wop music and have a new sort of respect for it. Because at first, as a kid, I thought that was just goofy music, but it was
Yeah.
so much good stuff there that Frank introduced me to, and Johnny Guitar Watson and Stravinsky and Edgar
Hmm.
Varese and all that good stuff, and even the stories behind a lot of his album songs with the Mothers, like "Let's Make the Water Turn Black." That's an actual true story about his family, neighbors and family and friends in Lancaster.
Hmm.
And if you've ever been to Lancaster, don't go there. But if you, it seems like nothing much has changed.
Okay, well, we're gonna move on from one musical innovator to another.
Hmm?
God, me and the transitions here. And my next book is Wreckers of Civilization: The Story
Mm-hmm.
of Cum Transmissions and Throbbing Gristle by Simon Ford. Okay.
Watch
Um,
your mouth.
yeah, I'll be careful there. There are some
No.
pictures in here where you're like, ooh, you better not let the preteen see that. But it goes through the history of Throbbing Gristle, and some bits I had no idea of. Um, I mean, there are elements like Throbbing Gristle to me, and I mentioned this in the last podcast. That was the first band that really challenged me in terms of what music was, what fell under that umbrella. And my first exposure to Throbbing Gristle was in this book called The New Music, which was this Australian book, which is just this like glossy pictures of new wave acts. And Throbbing Gristle had like a whole feature on them, and they shared the electronics section with Gary Newman and M, and like acts like that. And you could just from the picture you could see there was something so different about that act. you know
Yes.
and it was a band that I was always fascinated with. I was lucky enough to see them 3 times on the reunion thing. We
Wow.
probably already talked about this, so I'm not going to retread
Yes.
this. I don't want this to be the Throbbing Gristle podcast. But the copyright on this book was, I think, I want to say like 2000 or so. If it wasn't the late 90s, would have been the early 2000s. And Simon Ford was way too young at that point to have experienced the band firsthand. And I think that was really important because I don't think somebody who may have had nostalgia associated with this act could have done the job he did in as comprehensive a story as this was. And it covers their whole history from, essentially, not I want to say like hippie-ish beginnings, but kind of close to hippie-ish to their eventual crumbling apart in San Francisco in 1981. Also hits on some of the other industrial records acts, but still is the story of Throbbing Gristle, and that's my third book I'm bringing up, Records of Civilization.
I want to check that out because Throbbing Gristle is it's still I don't even have to call them a group, more like a collective of thinking. And
Yeah.
whenever I would see their albums and CDs and whatever, it just made my brain hurt. But I talked about that in the last
Yeah.
podcast. But
And
I
I
still
also realized reading this book another thing why I think I gravitated towards, and I think this comes from comic books,
Mhm.
because you have the same logo and the same company imprint on issue after
Yes.
issue after issue, and that was very much what Industrial Records was like, and I think that's why whether it's you're talking about acts as disparate as Sub Pop Records, did that with their trade dress, to Oasis, to Lady Gaga. There's this through line
Nine
in
Inch Nails.
design, Nine Inch Nails certainly, and I think that's why there was a somewhat instant appeal when I started finding out about that part of the band's history. So there we
It's
go.
kind of like Liebach. That's one reason why I gravitated towards
Yeah.
Liebach, because it's kind of the same sort of concept.
Yeah, and
And
heavy metal. I mean, God, Iron Maiden with that logo right across the top was. I
oh
mean, they
my
did that
god,
for like everything until the '90s, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think there's something there that it's something that takes me through a familiarity
Unifying.
that I have from
Yes.
comics into that particular area of music.
It's like Bozo approved.
Yeah.
Let's see. My fourth book is, and I think this is a recent acquisition, it's called Satan is Real, The Ballad of the Louvin Brothers.
Ooh.
The Louvin Brothers were a country slash gospel singing duo, 50s, 60s. And I think, a lot of people would recognize them for it. You've probably seen this on Facebook or on the internet of like, awful album covers. And,
Right.
they're very famous for their albums. Satan is Real. It's the two brothers in their white suits. They look like, Colonel Sanders, and a really goofy kind of cardboard cutout of a devil with a pitchfork behind like a burning landscape. But, I ran across this record at a used record store, well, like the CD actually, because the actual original vinyl pressings are very expensive. And I just said, this is a goofy looking record. I'm going to check this out. And yeah, pre Everly Brothers, pre Flying Burrito Brothers, and it's just, oh gosh, wonderful. I'm not, I'm not really into gospel music, but oh my gosh, these just harmonies are just, you can't touch them. So this came out. It is written by Charlie Louvin, the younger brother, and it was released after he died. He completed this a few months after a few months after he died. He wrote this from Beyond the Grave, but he wrote this finished a few months before he died, and um, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Very hard to read in the very beginning, not because it's tough to read, because just life growing up where they were, it. I love this book so much. It almost made me cry because it reminded me of my brother and myself.
Hmm.
Ira Louvin, who was the older brother, who was really the brains behind the band, but a tortured soul, a really awful alcoholic. But when he describes them growing up as kids, I see a lot of myself in Ira Louvin.
Hmm.
He was always getting them in trouble, but Charlie, the wiser, even though he's very young, was the younger brother, would just go along with whatever crap that there's a story about them chopping down a persimmon tree, their father's beloved persimmon tree, just for the hell of it. And you know he just told his brother, let's chop the tree down. No, Dad's gonna kill us. No, he's not. Here, get the axe. Okay, but we're gonna get in trouble. And just crap like that, working in the cotton fields and spending all their money on cigarettes and baseball cards and just, you know. But it was very endearing because it just reminded me of the crap that, I would put my brother through and getting in trouble for it constantly. But it is in I don't know what else to say about it other than it was just very endearing. And I was actually very fortunate to meet him one time. He did an in-store at Amoeba. This must have been 2005, 2006, and
Hmm.
just the sweetest guy would talk to you. And he signed my copy of Satan is Real, and just a gentle person. But you know I would never think that a valley boy like myself would relate to, him and his family.
Uh-huh.
His father was a sharecropper and picked cotton for most of his life, but just it's great. Check it out.
Okay.
Yeah. I
I'm
wish I
going.
can say more about that, but I just, read the book.
Okay. I am going even farther back
Uh-huh.
there for the next choice, and this is a very interesting book, and I'm surprised it doesn't have a lot more focus on it because it really is a book that anyone who I have turned on to has loved it to death, and for
Mm.
some reason people do not know about this book. You might. It's a book called "What Was the First Rock and Roll Record?" It's by
Mm.
Jim Dawson and Steve Probst.
Okay.
And what it does is it takes 50 records ranging from 1944 to 1956 and makes the case for each of them why this may have been the first rock and roll record.
Uh-huh.
And the choices are like way different from each other. The oldest in time is Blues Part 2, that was from a Jazz at the Philharmonic series at Carnegie Hall in 1944, and it goes up to Heartbreak Hotel in 1956 because their theory was by the time of this record there was no question that there was something called rock and roll.
Huh.
And you have some very different records on here. How High the Moon by Les Paul and Mary Ford is in there, as is something as rough as Ride in Cell Block Number 9 by the Robins, who were later billed as the Coasters, which is a really raw record. And some other really
Yeah.
raw records too, like 60 Minute Man by the Dominoes. And for each of the records, and this was a book that should have had a companion CD because there were some things I'm like, reading about that, I'm wondering, what the fuck does Teardrops from My Eyes by Ruth Brown and Bud Johnson orchestra sound like? Because it just made it so interesting the way they built each of these records up, and it details for each of them where and when they were recorded, when they were released, why they were important, what records that they influenced, who were they influenced by, the story behind their records, and also, and this I thought was very important to latch onto some things for some people, for listeners who are, catching this from a later in time perspective, important remakes. it almost plays out like I don't want to say a murder mystery, but a mystery of some type because there are they uh, basically treat each of the 50 records as suspects who did it, who really did it.
Clue.
And it also touches on, all these important elements of early rock history, like white recording artists basically commandeering the success path of black recording artists with a cover
Yeah.
version. And it covers, how intertwined in terms of sound more than culture that some of these records were like a country record or compared to an R&B record. Then you have something like Chuck Berry, who was this R&B performer who loves country music. It's really fascinating record, and I also would suggest this book to anybody who thinks of anything prior to the Beatles as, and I was guilty of this too. I have to say I was guilty of that for a long time. That I think the oldest record I would have listened to was "Please Please Me." You know, even "Love Me Do" was like, oh, they hadn't gotten it right
Yeah.
yet. And then
Just like how I used to feel about doo-wop music. Oh, that's just goofy
mhm,
music. Just
yeah,
yeah, dismissed, but no.
yeah, and the doo-wop records that they cover in here, like "Shaboom" by the Chords and a very early record which was "G" by the Crows,
Oh
just
my gosh, yes.
really, really
Hmm.
interesting write-ups. Hank Williams has a couple of selections in here as suspects. You also have Bill Haley records that weren't rock around the clock. One record called "Rock the Joint," which they felt that there's a case to be made there. And again, this book doesn't seem to have a lot of notoriety, but everybody who I've turned it on to has ended up falling in love with it. And you might too if you're not familiar with it there, Tito. Again, it's
I
what
will have
was the
to.
first rock and roll record by Jim Dawson and Steve Probst.
I will have to check that out because I'm pretty sure there's gonna be a lot of stuff that I have never even heard of that I'm gonna have to research. So
Yeah.
I love books and things that make me do that, and especially with my next pick of book. Are you finished with your?
Oh yeah, I'm finished. Yeah.
Okay, the next book and my final number 5 book, it's called Bubblegum Music is the Naked Truth: The Dark History of Prepubescent Pop from the Banana Splits to Britney Spears. This is a collection of essays about like bubblegum music. And those who know me know I love the Partridge Family, the Banana Splits, glam rock, anything pop, anything out of the Brill Building, anything kitschy and colorful,
hmm
anything that had its face splashed across a lunchbox. Bobby Sherman,
hmm
you know. Um, this book kind of validated my feelings, how I felt about that type of music for years.
hmm
Um, I love the Brady Bunch. I grew up with the Brady Bunch. Growing up, the Brady Bunch was shown 4 times a day. So by the time I was 5 years old, I've seen every episode at least 20 times. And, but the Partridge Family was only shown maybe in the summertime, and this is in Los Angeles,
hmm
not as frequent as the Brady Bunch was.
hmm
What I loved about the Partridge Family is the music in the Partridge Family. I just thought was just dynamite. No, I love the Brady Bunch. Their few songs I thought were great, but there was something about the Partridge Family music which, as a little kid, I would say to myself, "This TV show is not as good as the Brady Bunch, but this music is almost as it's as good, if not better, than the Mamas and the Papas."
hmm
That's how I would measure, and how we still measure pop music. Is it good as the Mamas and the Papas? So, it's a collection of essays, and it kind of validated my feelings towards the Partridge Family. Um, this book gets into, talks about the Brill Building, and also the Monkees, obviously, and the Cowsills, Boyce and Hart, uh, Tommy James and the Shondells, the DeFranco family, Dino, Desi, and Billy, all sorts of great stuff. And even, European acts, ABBA, and even kind of like your faux ABBA acts. And this has also gotten me into a lot of acts that I've never heard of that I've since become huge fans of. There's a group called Love, which was they're a Dutch 3-piece, kind of modeled after ABBA, but and Love spelled Luv. So,
hmm
and I just fell in love with that. It talks about Hanna-Barbera, Sid and Marty Krofft, the glam rock scene like Sweets, and still just a wealth of information and writings by different people, and just talks about obviously different people, but it's still a good resource for me, and I'm still discovering new. There's still a lot of bands and acts that I've yet to get around to, like the Poppy Family. That's one, in the past year I've discovered them, but a best of. I just think they're absolutely great. But still, check this out. It is wonderful. And I'm looking at this copy right now, and there's all sorts of, I have a lot of underlined and highlighted stuff. And there's even a list that I wrote down of, stuff that I need to, records that I need to get around to. And there's even, great articles about Don Kirshner and, the Ohio Express and Buddha Records. So it's all in here, and it's all great. And, people who still dismiss disco, I just, there's a lot. I like this. Bubblegum music is the naked truth, and I just,
Okay.
I want to just roll around to this music.
I think we have bubblegum music to thank for us even knowing each other. Because I remember back in the live journal days, you posted a picture of yourself looking like you were having the time of your life playing guitar, and then underneath in the caption you wrote, "This is me singing and playing Everything's All Right by the Archies."
Oh yes.
And I said, "Oh, this is the guy I want to know."
Oh my gosh!
But I do have to pick your brain about this because there's a lot of bubblegum I love, and we've been talking earlier in the week, Jingle Jangle.
I did that song.
Yeah,
that
I think that I want to involve my friend Chris Cummins, who's a huge Archie comics fan and isn't as familiar with the records, and I know that he really took to when I posted "Get on the Line" earlier in the week on our Facebook page. There's a peculiarity with that record because Sweet later covered "Get on the Line."
Yes.
And it doesn't rock nearly as well as the Archie.
Ironic, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just
Sweet, they can be pretty heavy. They kind of borderline proto metal in some areas, but
yeah. But not on that record. That kind of died to death pretty quick. And I have a lot of love for some stuff that you would consider bubblegum. Whether it's essentially like one-off acts like oh God, what the hell was their name with Green Tambourine?
The Lemon Pipers.
The Lemon Pipers. I mean, it's a perfect pop record. That record. The one act that has some prominence in this arena that I don't understand is the Partridge Family. The only record that I probably could listen to is their cover of Gene Pitney's "Looking Through the Eyes of Love," because I think that's a really good David Cassidy vocal.
Wow.
Looking through the eyes of love. It's a song that's written well for a singer like him.
He is one of my favorite male singers. Yeah. I'm saying this, but I'm staring at my Partridge Family lunchbox right now while I'm saying
But I really see a lot of the records and hear a lot of the records. It's just crap. And
oh my gosh,
I really I don't get it at all. I get the Monkees, like even an act that I don't like, but I get the appeal, like the Bay City Rollers.
Oh my God, wonderful.
But I get it. I don't get the Partridge Family records. I mean,
my gosh.
To me, it sounds like the guys that were in like Merv Griffin's orchestra, on the weekends. It was like, and correct me if I'm wrong. Like the Wrecking Crew played on a lot of those records, right?
Oh yes.
Yeah. I mean, these were people with some pedigrees in some other arenas, but it just doesn't work for me.
I think just listen to Sound Magazine and Up to Date. I put those two records up there with Pet Sounds. People are going to look at me like I'm nuts. But there's a few people who actually agree with me. Jeff Anderson, back me up, please, if you're listening.
Okay.
But
why don't you do that, Jeff? Because I don't get it. But then I have an unpopular bubblegum opinion where I would say the Jingle Jangle album by the Archies is as good as almost any Monkees record.
I will have to agree with you there.
Yeah.
Because they've made some dynamite records.
Yeah.
But but Sound Magazine and Up to Date, those two I just think are just two perfectly produced albums.
Okay.
And there's almost not one bad song on those, and it's just they're like little mini symphonies, and there's so much going on there without it sounding like traffic, and it's not minimal, but there's so much going on where, oh my God, it's beautiful. These beautiful sonic landscapes, and you know,
Okay,
Little Tracy's tambourine is awesome on those records.
I also have to ask you about this. With your interest in bubblegum, does it end
Mhm.
with boy bands?
You know what? I think because right now it is what 2016. I am beginning to really appreciate the Backstreet Boys now. So
Okay.
maybe give me another 20 years and I'll get around to One Direction. I'm
Uh,
not mad at boy bands. I think they're functional and they serve a purpose.
yeah.
You know. But you don't hear about. See, I mean, I couldn't tell you one single by One Direction at all because all you hear
Right.
about is who's dating who and blah 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 whatever. But
Yeah, because
I don't know.
that's
But but
where.
but 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 also, I think the music industry and the music making process is completely different to what it was 15 years ago.
Mhm.
So I'm not gonna just dismiss what they do, but I just think what they do musically is completely different now,
Okay.
and that has to go with like the productions and who knows.
Okay. Because there's still bubblegum being made.
Absolutely.
But it's not recognizable to me as that. It's to me in a
Yeah.
lot of ways far more crass,
Mhm.
more in attitude than sound.
Mhm.
And like I said, you can have records that are like there isn't an ounce of sincerity in them, but
Yeah.
you still love them. You know,
Yeah. Well,
there
maybe
were
just
records like that, and
maybe just like the Backstreet Boys. I think I Want It That Way. I just think that's one of the greatest songs of the '90s ever. One of the greatest pop songs of the late '90s ever written. I think
okay.
that song is just beautiful. I just want to eat it. It's so good.
Okay, well, you know what? You can have my portion too. That is, I don't want. The only act that I have affinity for from that time period, and not everything that they did, but I did think that there was a wonderful kitsch value to them, was Spice Girls. Was the
Mm-hmm.
Spice Girls?
No,
I think
you can
they're
have the Spice.
okay. I do think "Stop" by the Spice Girls is one of the best '60s pastiches, hands
Oh,
down. And
I,
listen
I
to
will
that
check that.
record again and see if you give me a record you want me to listen to. I'm going to listen to some of these Partridge Family records. You listen to
You
"Stop" by the Spice Girls with that
okay? I'll
filter
listen.
on, and you'll see what you feel. And I also think that Sporty Spice, there's that particular like pop rock sound that Pink and Kelly Clarkson are very good at. And Melanie C. Sporty Spice, she's very good at that stuff. It's just nothing that ever crossed over here.
Okay, I will
So.
check out Stop, and you listen to I Would Have Loved You Anyway by the Partridge Family off of Sound Magazine.
Okay. Well, I
Then
have
that's
my
one record
assignment,
that
you have yours.
I play
Okay.
over and over again.
Okay. All right. Away from bubblegum, but not too far,
The Osmonds. Let's talk about the Osmonds.
is well, let's not go there because remember when I sent you off on the Marie Osmond country records from the mid 80s?
Oh my gosh! And it's the Tito and Bill Goodtime hour, not week.
Yeah, but you know what? There are no rules. Hour-ish. My final pick is England's Dreaming by John Savage. I am going back to the 76 to 79 period of punk in England, and this one specifically deals with England. And it's rare that you get a book about a period of rock music from as good a writer as this gentleman is. John Savage would be a good writer no matter what he was tackling. You can't say that about some writers. There are some writers like Dave Marsh. I would shudder to think about him writing a book about Hollywood or something. He's good at what he does, but there's limits to that scope. I think if you threw John Savage on a book about Margaret Thatcher, or if you threw him on a book about Enron, it would be just as entertaining and just as comprehensive. God, I have to stop using that word comprehensive, and just as exciting. That's the thing that I come away with. And this book is naturally Pistols centric, Sex Pistols centric, because they were the dominant band from that time. It also covers a lot of the post punk acts. Subway Sect, for some reason, get a lot of time in this book. Um, but it's one of those books that I cannot imagine somebody reading, even if they were forced to, like a homework assignment, and not wanting to investigate some of the music that was written about because of how vivid John Savage makes his descriptions of these records and of these bands. It was also the first book about punk music which I felt properly gave its due to the Doors,
Oh wow,
which
yeah.
was you don't get too often. And I think
No.
certainly in terms of Morrison's attitude and also his, I mean, the freakiest thing is if you ever watch Jim Morrison's interviews within the last year of his life, he
Hmm.
is predicting electronica. He is predicting the
Okay.
return of dance music.
I've
He's,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's
I think I've seen some of
amazing.
those. Yeah.
Yes, some of those things that he's talking about,
Mhm.
like it's going to be one man and it's going to be very industrial sounding. He was
Yeah.
saying this shit in what, 71? You know?
Wow. And that's even before Frank Zappa, because Frank Zappa in Joe's Garage, which came out like in 78, 79,
Yeah.
talked about, pretty soon we're all going to be dancing to "The White Zone is for immediate loading and unloading only," and it's pretty much the same thing.
But it's a book that I think that, like I said, I think the greatest testimony you can give to a book about anything is about a book about any type of subject is if you read it and you come out wanting more. And he
Mm.
eventually did get more because he did put out a book called The England's Dreaming Tapes, which basically document all the interviews he did in relation to England's Dreaming. I think there was about a 10-year gap between the two. But England's Dreaming is my favorite book about rock music. So, some runners up there, sir?
Okay, my first runner up. First of all, thank you for talking about. First of all your picks. It's like, oh, I need to
Oh,
go.
right
I
here
need to
too. Yeah, I
check
mean,
those
like I
out.
want to, I didn't think I'd want to read a book about the Louvin Brothers.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
There
Oh,
was
it's
just like
beautiful.
that, like jokey, when you get those pictures of like, creepy Christian album covers,
That was one of them.
yeah, and that sounded like fascinating to me. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. I mean, I can't. Yeah. First runner up is Face the Music: A Life Exposed, which is the Paul Stanley autobiography. Now,
Uh,
to know me also to know that I'm a huge Kiss fan. And I used to be an first of all, I love Ace Frehley. He was my favorite for the longest time. But ever since I peed next to Paul Stanley at an Arthur Lee and Love concert, Paul Stanley became my favorite member of Kiss, because he, I was like, wow, knowing that he was at that show, I'm like, wow, this guy is into good music.
mhm.
And reading his autobiography, and I've read Peters and I've read Aces. I don't really care about what Gene Simmons has to say, but eventually I read
I
it.
lasted like 3 chapters.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's the only one I have other than Paul's. The other ones I read at the library.
Yes. I mean, Ace, Peter, I Love You, Drunken Buffoons,
Yeah.
and they just pretty much admit how messed up they were and how much they screwed up their lives, but they still blame it on, Paul and Gene. But what I got out of Paul Stanley is he is the true rocker of that band, and he wears his influences on his sleeve. He's constantly talking about the music he loves.
Mhm.
The Yardbirds, Slade, The Pretty Things, The Move, and it's constant throughout the book about
Yeah.
how much he really loves music. And that's what I love about this. And and this book is so fun to read because you can't not read it in a Paul Stanley voice,
Yeah.
You can't say, "Listen, people, I can't hear you." And just like there's a passage where he walks past this antique store and buys a Tiffany vase for like $20,000, and you just have to read that in a Paul Stanley voice, and I still laugh about it. But it's wonderful
Yeah.
read. So and I
Okay.
got an autographed copy. So
Yeah. Good. And so
what's
what
yours?
what are some of your others there?
My other honorable
Yeah.
mentions
Yeah.
is, where's my list? Move it, dogs. My dog's sitting on my list. Just Kids, Patti
Mhm.
Smith.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh,
Really touching book.
I
Oh
and
my God.
actually that should have been on my top five, because that's one of the very few books that I read when I was sad that it was over. I wish I'd never read it so I can read it again.
Yeah.
And it paints such a great picture of New York at that time, and
Mhm.
I just love New York before I set foot in New
And
York, which is
also something that could have been a real down experience, yet was
yes,
uplifting in
yes.
in many parts.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I think she
I
did.
I
I wish she would. write more
Yeah.
about, just like even like her history of going to the supermarket. Just
And just the Ottoman and just,
yeah.
getting hit on by Allen Ginsberg because Allen Ginsberg thought that Patti Smith was a boy.
Like,
That
yeah.
must be great. And just anything about the Chelsea Hotel. She can just write
hmm
volumes about that Chelsea Hotel and I'll read everything.
Okay, so is that it?
And
You got any others?
I'm looking at so many. Oh gosh, the Donovan book. Oh my gosh, the Donovan autobiography.
hmm
It's just, and I love the way it's written. How when it starts off, the early as a boy, he starts off in this sort of Scottish kind of Cockney accent, and then as he gets older, his vocabulary and his diction, I guess, improves as it gets later. But I loved it. I just love Donovan. So that's
Okay.
another. It's called the autobiography, Hurdy-Gurdy Man, the autobiography of Donovan. So
Okay, I have
read that one.
four runners up. I'll go
Hmm.
through them very quickly. The first book is Lords of Chaos: The Bloody Rise of
Oh
the
my
Satanic
gosh,
Metal Underground.
dude,
Uh,
how come I didn't put that one on there? Okay.
like I said, you know what? We could have done this next week and gotten, apart from me for England's Dreaming, would have
Hmm.
gotten four totally different books on the undercard. This is a book that details the church burnings and the connection with National Socialism and
Yeah.
not necessarily just Satanism, but also Odinism and
Yeah.
pagan interest in religion in relation to extreme metal. And
I got into so many bands because of that book. But yeah.
yeah, and the freakiest thing about this book is just don't want to cover it in detail, but it involves a murder. And
Uh-huh.
the person who committed the murder, when you see videos of him, he is one of the
Hmm.
most charismatic people I have ever seen. And he is
Yes.
a reprehensible person.
Uh-huh.
I think he's in jail now for anti-Muslim hate crimes or something, yeah,
Yeah.
in France or
Yeah.
something. But you can see, I don't want to get into like political theory and why fascism works at points
Mm.
among the masses, but you kind of get it seeing videos of Varg Vikernes.
Of course,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's just
Here's
it's
my deal with
freaky.
him. It's like
Yeah.
I wish his music was better. That's
Oh yeah. I mean,
that's my main
that's the thing
that's my
is like
main beef with you.
apart from Bathory, for me, like
Yeah.
most of the music was terrible.
Oh my gosh, dude, Bathory is wonderful.
Yeah.
Mayhem had a couple good highlights, but yeah. Oh
Yeah.
gosh, Carpathian Forest, not a fun.
And then I have a years and years long fascination with Coven since reading this book.
Hmm.
I mean, like
Oh my gosh.
the One Tin Soldier Band were Satanists,
Oh my gosh, they're like Satanic Jefferson
Yeah,
Airplane.
yeah.
I wrote Jinx a letter and she wrote me back. She sent me an autograph 8x10.
Oh, that's so cool.
I gotta dig that up. Yeah.
Okay, and then
I
just
bought a T-shirt from her webpage and then I wrote her a letter saying that I love this record. When's it gonna be reissued? And then she just says, here's an autograph 8x10 and some buttons and thank you for your support. Hail Satan. The Goth Queen, Jinx. And she used my real name, Carlos. I'm gonna post that to our page when
oh,
I
you
find
should.
it.
That's awesome. Just the other books I want to talk briefly about. You mentioned a Kiss book. I have to mention a Kiss book, Black Diamond by Dale Sherman, the unauthorized biography of Kiss.
Ooh.
This is a book that's written by someone who is clearly a mega fan, goes
Mhm.
into minute detail about their history up until around 97 or so. You can tell he was enamored of Eric Carr as a person.
Mm.
And
Yes.
and I think there are a lot of copies of the book that have a CD with an interview with one of the last interviews with Eric Carr.
That does sound very familiar.
Yeah,
Yes.
just really goes into depth, and like the depth that this guy goes into Kiss Meets the Phantom is amazing. I mean, and the thing is, he's never not critical. He's not
Hmm.
going into every hitting every topic like Destroyer was the greatest album of all time and Unmasked was shit. He treats every part of the band's history with respect and almost is
Yes.
divorced of critical commentary.
You don't even
He's
get that
just
from Kiss
providing the history.
themselves. They hate
Yeah.
certain parts of their history. But
Oh yeah, yeah.
hmm
But it's like one of those things like Faye Dunaway with Mommy Dearest. You just wish they'd embrace it.
oh my gosh, I really hope that that book comes to life. I heard rumors of she's writing a book about her experiences with Mommy Dearest, but
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
The next book I want to talk about is Comrade Rockstar: The Life and Mystery of Dean Reed, the all-American boy who brought rock and roll to the Soviet Union. Dean Reed had a couple of records on Capitol in the early 1960s, became a huge star down in South America, including in some territories where communism was either active or a predominant part of the culture or the political structure there, which eventually brought him to the Soviet Union and to East Germany, where he spent most of his career. Died a very mysterious death in 1985. He was
Mm,
actually profiled on 60 Minutes, which is kind of a
wow.
famous clip there. At one point, Tom Hanks was going to be directing a movie based on this book. And if you can find it, it's real cheap on Amazon used. Comrade Rockstar. It's a story of a rock star you probably have never heard of. And then the last book I wanted to talk about, which goes away from rock, but it's a music-oriented book, is Not Since Carrie,
Hmm.
which is a book that details the history of 40 years of Broadway musical flops. And it is a great read.
Do they talk about Legs Diamond, that Peter Allen flop?
Briefly, they talk
Okay.
about it briefly, but the centerpiece is Carrie, which is written by the
Hmm.
guys who did the music from Fame and was
Hmm.
directed by Debbie Allen Realness, Miss Debbie Allen.
Who
And
was a nice.
oh, I have a wonderful story about this particular show. And they had a musical based on Stephen King's Carrie, which
Oh.
supposedly was god awful at moments and was stunning at moments and was a flop. And my friend Karen, who I've talked about on the show before, went to see the show, I think, twice in previews. I think it closed very quickly, and
Hmm.
saw Debbie Allen at the stage door, and she was very happy. She heard that there were a group of kids that were going to see the show more than once, and this is so Debbie Allen. You can just hear this voice say, "Well, honey, you better go see us before Sunday because they're ready to close our ass."
Oh wow.
It also touches on why things flop, sometimes because of the egos of the stars.
Hmm.
Sometimes it was a show where you just had to wonder what in the hell they were thinking.
Springtime for Hitler over
Yeah.
there.
Now, it's a 1991 book, so you don't get into things like Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. So it's not just rock music we listen to, folks.
We listen to show tunes
You
and.
every once in a while, there's some times we're like, oh, that's Sondheim. And then we'll do that, and then we'll listen to Bathory. Uh,
Real quick, because what is on your reading list?
what is on my reading list? The
This year too.
Costello biography,
Hmm.
autobiography,
Mine
the
too.
Chrissy Hind autobiography. I
Mine
have to get
too.
to those. In terms of music-oriented books, that's about it. I'm also giddy about the Tony Tennille autobiography.
Oh my gosh, she has a lot of explaining to do. But yeah, my to-do list is pretty much the same. The Chrissy Hine, the Elvis Costello, and I just found out that he wrote a book a few years ago. Max Cavalera, he was in Sepultura and he's in Soulfly and Cavalera Conspiracy. I was a huge fan of theirs in the early '90s, and they rocked my world. They gave Slayer a run for their money, and I would love to read to hear what he has to say. And apparently, he was sued by his brother's ex-wife, for a defamation lawsuit because of that book, and she won.
Hmm.
So I'm just very curious to what he had to say about her. And also, I still have yet to read the Morrissey autobiography, so I want to read that soon.
All right, sir. So we're gonna wrap this one up. In terms of Bear Fight, what do you have coming up?
Tomorrow, well, we're recording this. Today is the 5th of February. We are playing pretty much every weekend in February at the Doll Hut. So if you want to find us, you want to see some people playing their asses off, go check us out, Doll Hut, and hit me up on Facebook. I'll send you a hat or a T-shirt.
All right.
How
And
about
as
you? How about
for
you?
me, oh, thank you for asking. Again,
You
the
got some
Comic
stuff.
Book Bears podcast has become a weekly podcast. So we're getting together every week and doing
Fun.
stuff. And this year we're making a concentrated effort on interviewing and spotlighting bear identified creators. And the first person that we interview is your good friend Jeremy Owen.
I know him.
Yeah. Yeah, so we talk about his imprint Burley Press and about Bludgeon, and
The
naturally, if you're
bludgeon,
talking to
yeah.
Jeremy, ventures into Legos and wrestling.
I was gonna say Legos, and he designed a bear fight T-shirt. So it's the one
Yes,
with like,
yeah,
yes, yes. So
yeah. And
we love
I
Jeremy
told him,
very much.
yeah, I told him on the interview, like, he really should do a comic about the history of professional wrestling.
Oh my God,
Because
that would be
I could not
great.
believe how much he knew about it,
It's
going into
insane, yeah. I think that's
tournament
one reason why
venue.
I get along with. Well, first of all, I adore him and Babalu so much. They're just like a family to me, and in more ways than just yeah. But oh my gosh, we could just get lost in wrestling.
All right, buddy. Again, we are the Tito and Bill Good Time
Good
Hour.
time. But thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to the next one. We love you.
You said I'm just staying up, and anyway I like it when the rain goes. I'm seeing your eyes, I'm reading books. Who wants love without the love? Once till I cry.